In the dense heart of West Africa, where the jungles merge with the savannas and the land is steeped in centuries of history, there lived a man whose name would one day be etched into the annals of Africa's resistance against European colonialism. This man was Samory Touré, a military leader whose legacy transcended the borders of Guinea and Mali. His defiance against the French colonial forces in the late 19th century became an epic tale of endurance, strategy, and unmatched courage. Born in 1830 in the village of Kenadougou, located in what is now Guinea, Samory's early life was anything but ordinary. His father, a respected member of the local warrior class, imparted valuable lessons to him. From a young age, Samory was immersed in the traditions of his people, learning how to fight, how to command, and how to navigate the complex landscape of alliances and rivalries in West Africa. His father's teachings were integral to shaping the man Samory would later become, a military genius, a tactician, and a visionary leader. Samory's village was small, but the area was a vital crossroads of trade and power in West Africa. The local tribes had always maintained a delicate balance of power, with various kingdoms and clans often at odds with one another. While Samory was still a young man, he saw his chance to rise above the fragmented chaos around him. Though his family was not noble by birth, Samory's ambition was greater than the expectations placed on him by his humble origins. As Samory grew into adulthood, the realities of his world began to sharpen his vision. West Africa was brimming with kingdoms, each with its own king, chiefs, and warriors. The empire-building history of the region was rich, with great powers like the Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire leaving legacies that loomed large over the landscape. But these once great empires were long gone, replaced by fractured states, each vulnerable to external threats. The most pressing of these threats, however, was a growing presence of European colonial forces, particularly the French, who had begun to expand their control in the region. The French Empire, under the guise of civilizing missions, sought to expand its colonial footprint across the vast and resource-rich lands of West Africa. By the time Samory was in his 30s, the French were advancing into the regions of Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Mali, making their way closer and closer to the territories of Samory's people. The colonial forces had begun to systematically undermine the indigenous powers through both military force and manipulation. For many in West Africa, the French presented not just a foreign military power, but an existential threat to the very way of life. Seeing the increasing peril of his homeland, Samory took a decisive step. He recognized that the key to survival lay not in passive submission, but in uniting the fragmented tribes and kingdoms against the shared enemy. Drawing inspiration from the ancient empires of West Africa, Samory began to consolidate power, forging alliances with neighboring tribes and kingdoms. His ability to unite various ethnic groups under a common cause was remarkable. Samory's charisma, wisdom, and tactical brilliance made him a natural leader. By the mid-1870s, Samory had transformed from a respected local warrior into a leader of a powerful military force. His new empire, the Wassoulou Empire, began to take shape. The name Wassoulou would soon strike fear into the hearts of the French, for it was here that Samory would set up his kingdom, a kingdom built not just on territorial conquest, but also on the principles of resistance and self-determination. He sought to recreate the spirit of the great empires of the past, but with a modern twist, an empire that would be capable of standing against the might of European colonialism. Samory's approach to warfare was unique and highly effective. He understood that traditional battles could be won or lost based on terrain, morale, and intelligence. His strategy revolved around using the environment to his advantage. He knew the dense forests, the winding rivers, and the steep hills like the back of his hand. The terrain was a powerful ally. His army, often outnumbered and less equipped than the French forces, utilized guerrilla tactics, attacking in swift, precise bursts before vanishing into the jungle. They knew when to fight and when to retreat, always keeping the French forces off balance. The formation of Samory's empire wasn't merely military, it was also economic. The French were not only after territory, but the wealth contained within West Africa, including the gold mines and the valuable trade routes that passed through Samory's land. By controlling key areas, Samory managed to maintain a semblance of economic independence. His forces protected trade routes, while also instituting a well-organized system of taxation, which allowed the empire to sustain itself and fund its military campaigns. By 1880, Samory's resistance had grown to become one of the largest and most formidable forces in West Africa. The French, eager to extend their control over the region, mounted a series of offensives against him, but they were consistently thwarted by Samory's tactics and the resilience of his people. For nearly a decade, Samory's forces kept the French at bay, inflicting heavy casualties on their armies. The resistance became a symbol of African unity and pride, inspiring neighboring kingdoms to rally to Samory's cause. Despite Samory's success in battle, the French did not give up easily. They began employing new tactics, forming alliances with local kingdoms and recruiting African auxiliaries to fight against him. These forces, under the French command, sought to infiltrate Samory's empire and weaken it from within. The French also started to target Samory's supply lines, destroying villages and crops to starve his forces. But Samory, always a step ahead, anticipated these moves and adapted. He began moving his forces deeper into the interior, away from the French advances, using the jungle as both a shield and a weapon. It was in these dense forests that Samory's guerrilla tactics were at their most effective. His army launched hit-and-run attacks, destroyed French outposts, and intercepted French patrols. For years, Samory managed to keep the French at bay, forcing them to waste valuable time, resources, and men in a drawn-out conflict. But as the years passed, the situation grew increasingly dire. Samory, though immensely popular and revered by his people, faced growing difficulties. His forces, though loyal and battle-hardened, were stretched thin. The French, now better equipped and more organized, began to gain the upper hand. In 1886, the French mounted a final decisive campaign against the Wassoulou Empire. This time, they came with a larger, more coordinated force, determined to crush Samory once and for all. After months of relentless fighting, and with his forces weakened by attrition and lack of resources, Samory was forced to make a painful decision. He would have to retreat. The French had taken his strongholds, and his empire was crumbling. But retreat was not surrender. Samory withdrew into the forests, leading his people deeper into the wilderness, where they continued their fight. He refused to capitulate, maintaining a resistance that would continue for years. In 1891, after a relentless pursuit, Samory was captured by the French. The once indomitable leader was brought to the French colony of Gabon, a prisoner of war. But even in captivity, Samory's spirit remained unbroken. His capture was a blow to the African resistance, but the fire he had ignited in the hearts of his people could not be extinguished. He was a symbol of defiance, and his struggle would continue to inspire generations to come. Samory died in 1900, far from the land he had fought to protect. His death marked the end of an era, but it did not mark the end of his influence. Samory's legacy lived on in the countless men and women who fought in the years that followed. His leadership, vision, and determination became the foundation upon which later African movements for independence would be built. In the decades after his death, as African nations slowly began to gain independence, Samory's name was remembered with reverence. His story became a beacon of resistance, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spirit of freedom could never be vanquished. Samory's fight was not just for his people, but for all of Africa, and his influence can still be felt today. His legacy endures as a symbol of courage, unity, and the unyielding desire for self-determination.